For over 9 months, Algerians have taken to the streets to demand a radical shift in the country's political order. But will the army give in to their demands? Hello and welcome to Bigger Than Five with me, Rida Fakhri. Algeria's 40-week-old uprising is approaching a critical juncture on December 12th. That is when a presidential election is scheduled to take place, and crackdowns on protesters in recent weeks suggest the country's military rulers may be less willing than before to give in to demands that the election be postponed. Millions of Algerians have protested regularly since February in what has become known as the Hirak, an ongoing movement that first sought to remove longtime President Abdelaziz Bouteflika from power and is now demanding a restructuring of the country's political order. The military has played a critical role in Algerian politics since the end of the country's brutal 8-year war of independence from France in 1962. But demonstrators are now hoping to change that. In just a few moments, we'll be joined from Algiers by Mustafa Bouchachi, one of the leading voices of the Hirak. But first, we speak with some of the demonstrators about what brought them to the streets and why they reject the scheduled elections.
الهدف هو كان تغيير النظام، أي عودة السلطة للشعب، وهذا لا يمكن أن يكون إلا بانتخابات حقيقية، انتخابات تفرز لنا رئيس شرعي. أما الانتخابات الحالية فهي ليست انتخابات حقيقية، والبوادر جميعها تؤكد ذلك، سواء إغلاق الإعلام، اعتقال المتظاهرين، عدم وجود لجنة حوار حقيقية، اللجنة المستقلة لمراقبة الانتخابات غير حقيقية. هذا ما جعل الحراك يستمر.
انعدام الكفاءة في هذه البلاد وخلاو الرداءة تتغلغل في كل المؤسسات في الدولة، والرداءة زائد الزبانية. هذه أمور كارثية لأي وطن. وفي الجزائر لحقنا للحدود اليوم. المشاكل تاع البطالة، المشاكل تاع الهجرة، والهجرة هذه عبر البحر. الجزائر رجعت تطيش ولادها في البحر.
People were scared for making move, especially when they were constantly being reminded, and any small rebellion acts against the government could lead to relive the terror of the civil war. The demands are changing and evolving, and it's not going to stop.
So then, where will the Hirak movement go from here? Will the military continue to crack down on the protests, or will it postpone yet another election? I'm now joined from Algiers by Mustafa Bouchachi, one of the leading voices of the Hirak movement. He's also a lawyer and former president of the Algerian League for Human Rights. Maître Bouchachi, you are considered one of the leading voices of this protest movement, yet it is a protest movement without an identifiable leadership. The Major General of the Army, Gaid Saleh, has no interlocutor. Isn't that a major handicap for any protest movement that wants to bring about radical change?
Well, I think, the Algerian people, when they started protesting in 22 February until now, it's 9 months. since the beginning of the movement, the Algerian, they are here. They are peacefully trying, to protest, and the main aim and they propose it's real changes in Algeria, and they do it peacefully. It's all over the country. There is no one single city that Algerians don't go protesting against, the political system in Algeria. And they carry on doing the same thing. Every Tuesday and Friday asking for one thing. We're not against, organizing presidential elections, but we refuse to organize presidential elections with the same system, with the same people who organized the electoral fraud the last 20 years. It's for that reason we always hope that the military people will listen and be wise. It's in the interest of everybody, interest of Algeria, it's interest of the institution, to go to real democracy.
Mr. Bouchachi, I mean, the protesters have been on the streets, as you say now,
yes,
demonstrating peacefully for several months. But do they have a clear strategy? Is there a roadmap to get to that transitional period that they're demanding?
Well, there is a lot of political parties, civil society, people, from the Hirak, who proposed to the pouvoir, the Algerian system, a roadmap. They said, we go for elections, we have to have a real dialogue, including the institution, the military institution, the political party, the civil society, and Hirak. It's not a question of not having people speaking in the name of Hirak. Love political parties, love national personalities, civil society, they were proposing in the last 9 months roadmaps. Everybody agree that we should go to elections, but we don't accept election organized by the same system because we don't trust them. We're going to have the same system again. It's for that reason, the roadmap of the Hirak and civil society and political parties, it's very clear. It's the institution who refuse to listen to the voice of the people.
You say they refuse to listen to the voice of the people. You have called it the march of history. You've said that Algerians were so determined this time that they will not allow any person or any institution to stop them from achieving democracy. But let's face it, can Algerians, however many they are on the streets, can they push aside the most influential, the most powerful institution in the country, the army?
Well, of course, we hope that the army would, accept, the roadmap we are proposing. But since they are against, the will of a lot of people who are protesting, they want to go to elections. We just say it's not wise. It's not the interest of Algeria to go to elections. The majority of Algerians refuse these elections. They can have their map and have their elections on the 12th of December. But, this election is going to make, the crisis worse because we're going to have a president who's not been elected by the Algerians, he doesn't have any legitimacy. He cannot solve the political problems. He cannot solve the economic problems. And it's going to affect the country in general. It's for that we said 12th of December. It's not a way, it's not a date we're going to solve the political crisis. We're going to make it worse. It's for that reason. They're going to have their elections, or they're not going to have their elections. In the end,
but how much worse can it? Are you expecting violence?
You can expect anything. It can be dangerous for Algeria. It can be for the stability of the country. To go those kind of elections. It's for that reason It's not going to solve the crisis. It's not going to do anything to the country. In the contrary, they're going to make things worse, economically and politically speaking.
And there have been more arrests. There have been more repression by the army towards the protesters. If the elections do go ahead on the 12th of December, though, do you expect to see a violent confrontation between the protesters and the army and the police? Do you expect widespread violence across the country?
No, I don't think so, because the Algerians, they're very wise, they're very peaceful in their demand, and we have the experience in the 90s. So most of Algerians, even the military institution, they don't want to go to any violence. So we're going to keep this revolution peaceful, like they say, our young people when they protest in the streets, keep it peace. It's the only way to succeed, to go to real democracy in this country.
Mustafa Bouchachi, good to have you on the program. Thanks very much for your time. Algeria's war of independence against France in the 1950s and 60s inspired a generation of revolutionaries. But its current uprising has received little international attention, despite being a potential watershed moment for the country. Algeria's Hirak has been referred to as part of a wave of demonstrations that began across the Middle East and different parts of the world earlier this year. But even with similar movements taking place in Iraq and Lebanon, Algeria's uprising defies being easily compared to other popular uprisings in the region. In a few moments, I'll be joined by two guests to discuss this. But first, a short look at Algeria's revolutions, past and present.
بغرض تصدي الصعب لهذه التصرفات من خلال تطبيق
So then, is Algeria's political order about to be upended, or will the current political class maintain their hold on power? To discuss, I'm joined in studio by Professor William Quandt, who was a member of the National Security Council during the Nixon and Carter administrations. He's also the author of 2 books about Algeria and is currently a professor of political science at the University of Virginia. And from Algiers, Zubeida Assoul, president of the Union for Change and Progress, UCP. She's also a lawyer and founding member and spokeswoman of Muwatana, a civil society movement, and she is just one of 4 women to have ever headed a political party in Algeria. Zubeida Assoul, you have been actively engaged out on the streets with the demonstrators, rejecting the scheduled elections for 12th December. Why do you not want these elections to take place, and how realistic is it to expect the army to give in to your demands?
We are against these elections in the current situation because for the past 9 months, millions of citizens have been in the streets to demand an irreversible break with the system of governance in Algeria. The break cannot happen when there is repression, when many political activists are in prison, simply because they expressed a point of view that is different from those in power. Today, the conditions do not provide for a calm election that can solve the political crisis. What Algeria is going through is a systematic political crisis of the entire institutional system. This is why we consider that these elections, in the current conditions, cannot solve the crisis. To solve this crisis, we must absolutely go through a serious and inclusive dialogue that can bring together the political class, the elites, and the activists of this peaceful revolution to reach a consensual roadmap. This consensus does exist within society and amongst the revolutionaries. It must become a political consensus in order to solve the crisis.
Professor Quant, you just heard Mrs. Assoul talk about a deep crisis facing Algeria. It is a country that you have studied and that you have written about for decades. In fact, your thesis at MIT was about the civilian-military relationship in Algeria. Has it become a military dictatorship, pure and simple? Can you see Gaid Saleh, the head of the army, actually give in to those demands and cancel the elections?
It's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen. This has been an amazing year in Algeria because most people had not foreseen that this kind of peaceful protest could be sustained at this extraordinary level. It's now gone on for 9 months. Every week, hundreds of thousands, maybe sometimes millions of people peacefully in the streets demanding change. And demanding in a very responsible way, I would say. They're not calling for people to be put up against the wall and executed from the old regime. They're simply saying, we want a fundamental change. We've had too many elections that simply produce the same results, the same old cadre. And at the very beginning, there was a sense that the army and the people were on one side. That's no longer the case.
But should we still distinguish, though, between Gaid Saleh, the head of the army, and the army, as the protesters often do?
It's hard to say. He's not a young man. There are younger officers who may have different views, but he is running the ship with a very firm hand, and he seems very, very têtu, stubborn.
But who is blocking these popular demands, would you say? Is it the army as an institution, or is it a handful of army generals?
Listen, since the departure of former President Bouteflika, we said that his resignation was one element of this system. But Bouteflika alone does not represent the entire system. That's why we're saying that a big part of the system that we want to break with is still here. The people who are blocking this today and who are opposing the will of the people and their popular demands are part of the system that is still in place. Whether it is the generals within the army or certain players within other institutions, all the political parties with Bouteflika over the last 20 years, all these people are still there. They're the ones who still hold important posts within the army and the state institutions. We shouldn't forget that the current government was appointed by former President Bouteflika. That's why people are saying they cannot accept the elections with the very same people who are responsible for the situation the country finds itself in. The deadlock is at that level. It isn't just one person. It is a group of people in the army, not the army as a whole, but the generals. It is also those in government institutions.
How concerned should Algerians be about the situation if the elections aren't cancelled? You yourself have written about Algeria's Black Decade back in the 1990s, when you were saying there was a promising experiment of opening up the political system, but that led to elections being won by an Islamist group, the Islamic Salvation Front. Those election results were cancelled, and then you had about 150,000 people killed in that decade. Can the army take the same risk now with this sort of uncertainty and turmoil?
There is some danger of the elections going forward. Very few people, I think, will actually participate. So the legitimacy and the purpose of elections, after all, is not just to have people vote, but is to solve a political problem. I think the real fear is that at some point, somebody's going to resort to violence on one side or the other or both. But it hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't have to happen.
Zubeida Assoul, how much longer can you expect this relative restraint by the army to continue? And how long can you expect these peaceful protests to continue as well?
Une question très intéressante parce que aujourd'hui, c'est ce que nous disons, nous, dans l'opposition.
This is a very interesting question because today this is what we in the opposition say. Certainly within my party, this is what we've been saying since last March, that elections and changing the name of the president isn't going to solve the political crisis in Algeria.
Qui a été décidé unilatéralement de la part du pouvoir en place.
Today, when we look at the presidential electoral campaign and how it started, how it was unilaterally decided by those in power, and how millions of Algerians have clearly rejected it over the last 9 months through their slogans and peaceful marches, we say that whatever the situation is, it will be an election that is imposed on the majority of the people who reject this process in these conditions.
Quel que soit le candidat qui va passer, il va être affaibli.
Whichever candidate wins will not have any popular legitimacy to give him the capacity to engage in a dialogue with the rest of the citizens, who I believe will remain mobilized even after the elections and December 12th.
Pour moi, on appelle de toutes les manières à la fois le chef d'état-major, mais tous les gens qui sont dans les positions de décider dans notre pays.
So we can call on the army chief and all those in decision-making positions in our country to exercise reason and listen to the people and to go through a period of transition in a way that will lead to the necessary conditions to have credible elections that will be accepted by the people and that would lead to a real change of government.
De gouvernance dans notre pays, et c'est ça l'essentiel, je pense.
Why aren't we hearing any criticism from Western capitals? Why has there been this conspicuous, deafening silence when European nations, at the very least, should be concerned, shouldn't they, by what's going on in Algiers, considering that they import, about a third of their natural gas needs from Algeria?
I think Europeans are concerned, European governments. In fact, right now, the European Parliament is beginning a debate on Algeria. But Algerians don't really want foreign intervention in their own affairs. They don't want it from the French, they don't want it from the Europeans, they don't want it from the Americans, they certainly don't want it from the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis. So I think the absence of foreign involvement is actually a good thing. On the other hand, the kind of attitude that all the West cares about, the Western countries cares about, is stability in oil, is I think also a mistake. And there should be more people interested in what is truly historic in this part of the world, a 9-month-long popular uprising. And this really is an uprising. It covers the entire spectrum of the country. It's not just in Algiers, it's not just Arabs, it's also Kabyles and secular and religious. And it has been peaceful. You can't find very many examples of that. And we should at least be wishing the Algerian people well out of all this, because they have done something remarkable. And I think it's really the indifference that hurts Algerians more, that people don't recognize that what they're going through is first important for them, first of all, but also for others in the world. But also it's kind of a model so far of a decent way of trying to bring about political change. It's not Syria, it's not Libya, it's not Egypt. It's a little bit more like Tunisia. And I think the Tunisians and the Algerians are mutually trying to reinforce one another's movement in the direction of real change toward more pluralism, more democracy, more freedom.
The protest movement accuses the system, as they call it, le pouvoir, of being in the pockets of some of the countries you mentioned, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and France. Gaid Saleh, on the other hand, the army chief, says that the protesters are being manipulated by, quote, foreign enemies of Algeria. To what extent is this protest movement, Zubida Assoul, independent, and how long can it remain that way?
Aujourd'hui, nous sentons que nous avons la capacité, la possibilité, l'intelligence.
Today, we feel that we have the capacity, the possibility, and the intelligence to make a real break and reach a solution among Algerians, because we know what we want and what we no longer want. We no longer want a corrupt system. We don't want an opaque system. We do not want arbitrary rule. We do not want the army to be involved in political decisions. Algerians aspire to a government rooted in the rule of law, liberty, and transparency, where citizens have the freedom to exercise their rights. Now, of course, Algeria lives within a global system, a world that is globalized at all levels, politically, economically, and socially. We feel that Algeria is now on the right path and that all foreign partners must respect our popular will. They must respect what Algerians want. That's all we're asking for.
Asul and William Quant, thank you very much indeed. So will 9 months of sustained, massive and peaceful popular protest unseat a political system accused of corruption and cronyism? And can people's will and sheer determination actually prevail over the diktat of an 80-year-old head of the army? The outcome of these widely rejected elections can only exacerbate tensions and bring Algeria closer to a confrontation. But whatever happens next, the people of the country are once again writing their own history. From me, Hirak, and all the team here in Washington, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.